Welcome to the ChessCube General Guide to the opening. What I want to do in this guide is to give you the best possible understanding of how to play the opening successfully in a game of chess. To start off with, I'm going to be covering opening fundamentals, and then we're going on to look at all the major chess openings. I'll be trying to give you the main ideas behind the openings so that you understand them better when you come to play them in your games. This is a series for beginners, newcomers to chess, and novices who want a good general guide as to how to play the opening. So we're going to start off with the absolute basics. What do you really need to know when you sit down with the position in the diagram before you? How should you play this position? Well, it's my contention that if actually you have a good grasp of the basics of chess, you don't need to know an enormous amount of chess theory at the early stages. You'll see books, chess books, in the library, in bookshops, hundreds, maybe even thousands of books at chess specialist retailers, and they're full of chess theory. This only interests us when we become stronger at chess. But for the opening stages of the game when you're a beginner, you don't need to know very much. The first basic rule, you have to understand that the centre is very important. You should control or occupy the centre at the start of the game. The reason is that a piece or a pawn in the centre is much more strongly placed than it is on its original square or on the edge of the board. The central squares are marked in blue: d4, d5, e4, e5. And the extended centre, we can move the centre out a bit, maybe pushed out to c4 and c5, f4 and f5. All of those squares have a very important bearing on the opening of a game of chess. If you can conquer those squares or get control there, you have the upper hand at the outset of the game. And this is very important. Now, just going back, how should one think about controlling or occupying the centre? Well, one way to do this is to put your pawns in the centre of the board. An ideal setup for white, let's say, is to simply play e4 and d4. The two white pawns there are very strong, and as you can see behind those pawns, it's very easy for white to develop his pieces. I'll come on to that point in a moment. But black, for his part, has to fight against that white setup. So, for instance, in this given position, black may play a move like d5. It's no good for beginners to sit there and let white dominate the centre. So a move like d6 would not be as good. A move like e6 would not be as good. Black simply is not fighting for the central area of the board. Clearly, for black, it's ideal if he could get his pawns on e5 and d5, but against a strong opponent, you're unlikely to be able to do that. So this is why black has prepared his attack on the centre by playing c6. He wants to gain a foothold there by playing d5. Both sides, this is called the Caro-Kann defence. It's of no importance. It's just very crucial to know that both sides are fighting for the centre. So you can play to dominate the centre by occupying the centre with pawns in the opening. The ideal setup, pawns on e4 and d4. Now we come to the second golden rule of opening play. Get your pieces out as quickly as you can. And by pieces, I mean the pieces on the back row, not the pawns. When I look at a lot of beginners' games, I see them moving pawns almost exclusively. And curiously enough, this applies especially to children. They love moving pawns. Yet, that's not the way to play good chess. You only need to make a minimum of pawn moves in the opening. What's really important is to get your pieces out. Knights come first, then bishops. After that, the queen and the rooks. The most difficult pieces to develop are the rooks, because they're jammed up in the corner. And we'll come on in a moment to look at the best way of developing the rooks. But for the time being, it would be a nice idea to get your knights and your bishops out first. Those are the easiest pieces to develop. So, for instance, a traditional opening line might see e5 by black. This is called the open game because it's very easy for black to get his pieces out after this move. White brings his knight out, attacking the pawn on e5. Black defends. White brings his bishop out to c4, black does likewise. White brings his knight out to c3, black brings his knight out to c6, and both sides continue with developing their pieces. Okay, this opening doesn't set the Thames on fire in terms of interest, but it does give a good indication of how two beginner players might simply get their pieces out in the opening. I've seen this position crop up time and time again in games between young players at the novice level, and it's very logical. So remember, a minimum of pawn moves and a maximum of piece moves in the opening. Get those pieces into the centre and start fighting for the middle of the board. Now we come to the interesting question of how to get the rooks into the game and the queen. These are your major pieces. In general, in chess, it's a bad idea to develop major pieces early because they can simply get pushed back and you lose time. The opening is a battle for time. So, for instance, if White carelessly played his queen out to h5, that is possible. Don't get me wrong, grandmasters have played queen h5, but it's not a move for beginners because only too easily can black push around the white queen and white is going to lose time in this position. The queen must retreat, and you know, what has white achieved by putting the queen on h5? Absolutely nothing. All he's done is given a move to black. So it follows that the lesson we learn from this brief example is, firstly, it's not that easy to get the major pieces out in the opening, and secondly, the opening is a battle for time. Don't put your big pieces on squares where they can be attacked and driven back immediately, or you're going to lose time and you will lose the battle of the opening. Now, by far the easiest way to get the rooks into the game is to castle, and this brings me on to my next opening principle: get your king to safety in the opening as quickly as you can. The king is your most important piece in chess. The king must be shielded from attack, and the most effective way to do this is to castle. Now let's just see a position where both sides castle early. White is bringing his pieces out. This opening is called the Vienna. Black likewise brings his pieces out. White brings his knight to e2. And then black castles, bringing his king to safety. Castles does two things with one move. It safeguards the king, and it also brings a rook into the game. Perhaps the next task for both players will be to find employment for the queen and eventually the rook on the queen side. This all takes time, but you can see my point. Get your king to safety, and by so doing, by castling, you get a rook into the game. After the minor pieces come the queen and the rooks. So just to summarise what we've learned so far: occupy and control the centre, get your pieces out, get your king to safety. Finally, we're going to learn how to form a plan in the opening. And the way we form a plan is to basically start looking at the major chess openings. Once we start stripping out these openings, you will see plans naturally developing out of the variations. And I'm going to take you through all the major openings in this series, from the e-pawn openings to the d-pawn openings to the flank openings. We're going to take a little look at each of them in turn and try to see how they tick. By understanding how the openings tick, how the openings moves work, you're going to start learning about planning and how these basic principles of controlling the centre, getting your king to safety, developing the pieces as quickly as possible, help you in open board chess. Right, I think I'm going to leave it there for the time being as far as opening fundamentals go, and we're now going to start our inquiry into major chess openings.